So as we begin this session, what I want you to have is this idea when you have your block and your bolster under your center line, that the body is to kind of firm down through the legs. Oh, I forgot to mention, if you have a little wall space to have that nearby today, we are going to use the wall for some nice bridge and legs up and crossover. So I think it'll be a great treat. I love the ability to use a wall at home so easily. Hopefully you got a little spot. So put on the sand, put on your sand, and place it in a space that feels like it kind of hugs your body. So that would mean that your legs aren't too splayed out. But you know, legs can stretch outwards, but hips aren't going to necessarily rotate with the legs. So this might be an opportunity for you to follow some of this guidance, or maybe some of these alternate options work for you. So let's kind of get rolling with that idea. You've got the sand across, okay, legs are down, firmed, you know, they're still separating a little bit lazy with the feet, but they have a sense of reaching, okay? And the arms open, chest widening. Second option would be to stay with the knees bending. And if the knees bend, you might feel a difference in your circulation in the chest and the shoulders. It might be nice to have these two versions that you're shifting between for this session. Maybe your knees bend and then the legs descend in the beginning, relaxing your eyes. If at any time you need to ask about the setup or the pose, just unmute yourself and ask. And if the spine has its natural kind of line of curving, feel how that spine attempts to arch, and maybe the idea of lengthening it is out of bounds for your consciousness. But if you can articulate that movement of the ribs with the breath, so as you inhale, feel that expansion. And it might feel like it's mostly in the belly if your knees are bending. If the legs are descending, the breath might feel a little bit higher into the ribs. So play with that exploration of designing movement in your breathing muscles. And this is kind of the wonder of restorative, I find, is that versus a sitting practice, it is a stillness practice, but you're able to lay on props or lay over props, one or the other, and use that to help carve your body into shapes that explore your breathing muscles and other muscular experiences. So inhaling for a count of 4 to 5. And exhaling for a count of 5 to 6. Feel what moves, whether it's the belly or it's the ribs. And if that arch in the back feels compressive, then you simply bend the knees, and you can bend them just a little bit. You could pull them in farther and just kind of have a little bit of play with how that reacts in your breathing. You might make it a little more dense. And now start to move the legs to cobbler's pose. So the feet will slide towards that pattern of the bottoms of the feet down, and then see if you can just let the feet swoop together, the soles of the feet touching. Maybe it's the little toe side of the foot that is closer together than the inside. And then let the feet kind of frolic a little bit with that openness in the center, the core of the feet. And so the core together, right, kind of opens up. And then the hips have some effect. So this might be one where the sand feels great here at the hip points. You might decide to change the sand, place it up to the upper rib space where the ribs intersect at the upper abdomen. And you might feel as if, well, this hip area is where I want to work on the density and the circulation, so you could keep it here. But noticing when the knees part that there's benefit for the front of the spine, the discs, but there is some challenge for the vertebral tension, right? It sometimes gets a little more tone at the base of the spine. So even though we'll feel this with the arms out, place a few moments of awareness, not necessarily attention, which could be tension, but awareness of the circulation through the upper ribs, down to the belly. Feel the lift of the mid-body with your breath. And starting to feel yourself become aware of your physicality. Some of the challenges, some of the balances that you feel side to side. Let's kind of go towards what might be our most balanced yet. So we'll bring the knees to point up, the bottoms of the feet press. We're going to be working our way towards Viparita Karani. And we're going to do both today. We'll do in the middle and then we'll do to the wall. They do feel different in the middle and when you have support behind the legs. So this point, we're going to have mostly just the support of the feet. So I want you to bring the hips tilt to any side. We'll do slide the block away, keep it nearby. And if you do have a ball, have that as well, okay? And if you didn't get one, then don't worry about it. We'll have enough options with other props. But we place the feet at attention so you feel all the corners of the feet to start. As you push down, you're still in a bridge pose. You'll push to lift up the hips and then try to get a hold of the sides of the bolster and then glide that down at the least, right? So the minimal pushing it down under the pelvis to hold the back of the pelvis like it's a basin it can sink into the bolster, okay? If it goes too far down, then you might feel too much back pressure. So I want you to feel like this kind of covers the load of the back, the lumbars. And if you feel the bolsters under your, heart space, it's too far up. Okay, so let's see if we can find that. And as we get the one blanket now under our head, if you had to go down to one, and then bring your hands so that they're touching the sides of the bolster, and you'll lift up maybe your non-dominant leg. Just give that a try for your psoas muscle. Feel as you lift the opposite leg as your dominant. And then as you lift, is the bolster underneath you enough first? And feel if you can make a right angle with the legs so they lift the feet while your core lifts your feet. And then feel that the back of the pelvis kind of relaxes on the bolster, okay? Now we're gonna find a sandbag and we'll place it in quality, right? Quality sand placement. So I'll place it across my mid-torso to get it to even out. Doesn't mean it will stay open when I get it on the feet, but when you squeeze the knees in, and if you choose not to use a sandbag, then you don't have this instruction, but you'll place it at the bottoms, and as you push your feet up, get a feel of moving away from the midline, like towards the foot of your mat. And then I have to kind of keep working on the quality of adjustment for my upper back and the connection from my neck into the skull. So this blanket could be something you fuss a bit with under your head and decide, do you want it all the way down to the top of the shoulders? Do you want it just under the occiput where you usually put the belt for brain float, or really so it cradles just the brain? You choose. Find what works for you to feel that your brain can settle. At the same time, you're holding up your weight, right? So if you alternate maybe your focus sometimes in some other area, the lower area that has all the workout is going to keep working, going to keep working out, or keep working up, and flexing through the feet. Feel the motion of the arms interlace at the roots of the fingers. I like to sometimes do this and put the hands onto my abdomen and then really feel the breath in my hands. It seems to have a little more of a science quality to it versus other ways to talk about breath in your hands. Because as I hold on in that interlace and the hands are trying to open, they're a little different than when you try to open up your feet. Like our previous pose, hands are different than feet. So when you lift up, I want you to let the hands just relax into that navel center. And if you're opting out, your arms are relaxed open. And now try to keep that kind of mold of the belly in its lift and its center. And can you keep the belly motioning this way as you turn the hands around so they go up towards the ceiling and mildly motioning? They might move just straight up towards the ceiling. They might start to glide a little bit back. And the emphasis is on the belly continuing that movement. If it lost that contact of lift and lower, you can always bring your hands back to it. Just as your little reminder. And those of you that want to go a little bit towards overhead with the hands, you could try that direction with the shoulders. And feel if the armpit chest is capable of balancing. Yeah, your legs could get tired. The calves could find some fatigue here. And I find that if I overly flex my feet, like I just work on muscling into it, I do have this kind of underlying tension building. And if I kind of dawdle into it and let the feet, maybe they push up a tiny bit, then I find a balance. I think just like when you're standing on your feet, you eventually figure out how to stand on them and make habits, you know? So changing it and creating a specific flexion and balance of equilibrium is likely to cause a little stirring up in your ankles, the hamstrings, maybe an inkling of discomfort. So noticing what you do to create ease. And then if there's a way you can reinforce that flexing of the feet. So you're balancing. You know, those of us with the arms overhead, let's all relax our grip on our fingers for certain. So we're more in that cactus, elbows are out, hands straight back. And that arch in the spine is quite defined, okay, by the bolster and the elevation of the legs. Make time here to field subtle movements with breath in the belly, meaning the legs might shift. The eyes might find closure and trust in a balance. We'll take a final few moments with this version of legs up. I mean, I suppose all versions of legs up will be their up, but the supports of them could be different, right? Wall or middle of the room or a block underneath. There's different ways to get the legs inverted. Reversing the flow of gravity into the heart and the lungs and the brain, but that's definitely happening. So as you bend through the knees, of course, okay, feel how the back leg layer, where does it kind of develop its musculature? Is it like, if you were to touch, and go ahead with that, if you like, the space at the back of the knees, that is a very interesting layer. I don't know if you ever feel pain at that space over the years, but it might be more lateral for us, or it's medial. Right? That's generally our issue, arthritic issue, osteo issues are these areas, not often back. So use that to, you're strengthening into your hamstrings via this channel. So what we'll do is we'll go into a brain flow. We'll take a short one. So feel that compact bending, and then careful that you don't overly bend through the legs. You just want to take off the sand. Place one on the top of that left thigh and add a belt. We want our belt to be buckled up so it's in a loop. If you have your belt unbuckled, it probably won't work for brain flow. So try to find something that's connected in your surroundings, and it's simply a strap. And when we tighten that down, you're going to have enough length so that it's very easeful to get the belt where the neck meets the skull, right? So the occiput. Now I find that that spot where the neck meets the skull is a little below where my belt is for me. Now, if I try to take it a little farther down, right, it's kind of stuck and wedged above my ear. For me, for my head. So we might all be a little different with how we can move that belt in the vicinity of the occiput. Let's say occipital vicinities. Yeah, and I think you're striving in this one to have this duality, right? It's quite the excursion of feeling how do you get your left foot to stabilize, because it's usually turned out most of the time. So I'm going to try to work on that heel, placing down the flex of the foot like I had with my sand on the soles of them. Same foot flexing. But sure doesn't feel like there's sand on the bottom of it. And, you know, actually, if you were at a wall space, if you're close enough to one, this would be a really good one to have your foot at the wall. So if you want to redirect your whole game plan, you could do that. Won't be the worst experience. In fact, you might get a good home practice by searching around your space throughout the session to use a wall for this and not for everything. But we're going to be roaming a lot today with our versions of things. So as the brain is tilted, this is the ultimate flexion for my neck now. I'm going to let the weight of my head lean back. I'm going to hold the back of my head so I feel really safe to venture back with my head. I don't lose my belt. And then take a few of those breaths with the abdomen motioning against gravity. And then it always falls back with gravity. And then breathing this way, it releases that gravitational pull on the organs, like that happens when you're standing, and the organs, everything slouches down. There's the prolapse occurring. So even if we get some of these shapes during the day or every other day, helpful for the organs. Do it for the organs. Okay, now if my upper back feels pretty pasted to the ground, it's not really fluctuating and lifting, I'm going to work on changing sides and be very simple direction. Okay, so I slide the sand off the left, I bring it up to my core, simply hands behind my head on the belt, slide the left foot in, then lift up the foot into the belt. Now, if you're not practicing brain flow like this with the belt behind your head, gotta give these options sooner, huh? Then slide your sand to the left thigh, or the right thigh, sorry. This could be an option where you have your hands in the beginning holding the belt so that the belt is between the index finger and the thumb, the webbing, and then working the arm straight back with the belt under that foot still. That's the second option. And during the brain flow, if you get fatigue, brain fatigue, you could take the belt off and go into that version. So it's really the webbing between the thumb and the index that's important to remember on that one. But as the belt is at the skull at this point, where it meets, right, where it meets the neck a little bit above, you know, feeling that connectivity, if the arms are open, that maybe your head tilts back a little more. Maybe the flex of the left foot is stretching the back of the knee. So it's so interesting. The back of the knee doesn't have the issue, but it is the one that part that hyperextends, which affects it all. So it might be a place you work on toning. So in this position, I can almost feel the quadricep naturally gravitationally pulls up to the hip flexor, right? And it is a hip flexor, the quadricep, but to the top of the thigh. So it's already lifting that thigh muscle, but you're not doing anything. You're not like having to contract to get that thigh to go higher. So I just think inversions are great because you can be kind of passive with them in some ways. You don't have to tough it out. But you do need to get aware proprioceptively about being upside down. But once you nail that, then you can just become a bat. Okay, so a few more breaths here. Sand for me is really at the top of the right thigh. The right foot might cooperate differently than the other. You might be feeling like, well, it's almost turned in on this side. Maybe it's different for you. And the legs will have curve, right? If you look up at your leg, it's not going to be straight, right? It's going to have a little bit of curve with the thigh and the calf. So fielding the movement. And letting your left knee bend. See if you can feel the direction of the hands reaching to the back of your skull. Slide the belt off, okay? And then lower your head down, whatever version you're in, your hands are gonna both hold the belt and slide the sand off. Keep it nearby. You might wanna have it over on the left side today, if it's kind of getting tossed away. And then as you move your belt over, I want you to, well, actually not your belt, but your arms. You'll hold the belt with the right hand and you'll cross the left leg over to the right and balance the direction of circulation traveling. Now, if I push the leg into the belt, it might feel different than when I use my arm, and not too much arm musculature, but I use the direction of holding my belt, holding the angle of the leg. This is one where you get to modify to your needs right now. So my right foot is relaxed. I'm not trying to get my bottom foot to turn out or stay up. And then for me right now, it feels better to bend my left knee and to kind of coach that back on the bolster to stay centered, to not roll with the leg. Okay. And then for all of us, if the left leg is straight, if it's a little downstream, you're kind of marinating in the hip a little bit. Focus on the balance of hip to hamstring to calf. Just take a moment as if you're going to do a mild bend of the left knee and then reach down into that belt over to the right. You're reaching to the right with your left foot. Okay, now slide the right foot in a little bit. And then as you step into the right foot, your left leg will go up and hold the belt wide with both hands. Bring the right foot up into the belt, and as you change the foot in the belt, lower the left leg and give a moment of just awareness of kind of shaking out that left leg. There might be some circulation kind of spilling through the leg that you're noticing. And then hold the belt together with the left hand. And as you open the right arm, you're going to guide your right leg, and likely it could go a little bit, it could go a little farther over towards like 10 o'clock. Probably not 9. You're probably not going to shift that far over and downwards into the hip, which is what will get the demand. So I like to feel kind of the line of energy from my upper right leg, right, the root. We call it the root of the leg or one of the pelvic roots. And then what's occurring with your breathing? If it started to really slow down. When things feel intense, it could be a direct relationship of, you know, a little bit of fear, a little bit of worry, a little bit of kind of trepidation. So the breath will likely shift a little bit for some of us, maybe faster, maybe slower. Okay, now as the leg kind of knows how to release into the belt, your arm will hold it up. It's not going to drop your leg. And the leg is usually so tense at the top that it doesn't flop over. Okay, now feel how we're working the side of that right leg. It's more side beam. Okay, now as you bend through that right leg, just a little, doesn't have to be a whole lot. You're going to slide the left foot in, and we'll take the belt off of the right foot. And what we'll go towards is, if you need to bring both knees up and just kind of shake it out or squeeze the backs of the legs in before we come out from this shape with the bolster. But we're going to stay with this right leg awareness. So I want you to take ease with rolling to the left. Use your hands to help slide you down so you're towards the foot of your mat at your bolster or underneath your side body. This may be sides of the waist, maybe it's right up to the left thigh. And then get a hold of those blankets and place the top blanket so they're stacked. You might decide to have your top blanket a little bit higher, or maybe you want it to be flat. You can always start low, bring it up, or opposite. And the recommendation would be to have your ball on the inside of that right leg, just because we just crossed this leg over and we want to continue a little of that sensation. Even though it's interesting because the leg isn't being pushed to the side, it's now just underneath its hip. Okay, the hip it was assigned. So lean to this left side, down over the bolster, and then maybe a block overhead would have been nice. Get that if you need to. Heads up on the block idea. Blanket might need to get rolled up. So I find that last time we were doing this on screen, we talked a little bit about having the option of the head resting on its back for this pose, the back of the skull. That we've been doing this mostly on the side. And today this feels better on the side for me than on the back. That kind of changes, you choose. You know, and find how that sand could be across the hip, or it could be connected from the ribs down towards hip. And I think this rib hip connection is a little, it is isolated. I don't really think of ribs and hip as being a complete story there. So they do have opposite workouts going on. So the block overhead could go really high. Surprisingly, it might feel better for your shoulder. You can opt out of using the block whatsoever. Your arm could be resting on the bolster. It could be opening towards the ceiling. It could be here, overhead. So wherever your head might be, I mean, mine is probably going to be a little lifted because I'm talking and slightly engaged with the process. For you to be more engaged, it's likely to relax the weight of your skull. And everything's okay to explore, but perhaps a nice insight is to feel the opposing reaches of the extremities, mostly the right arm and right leg. And that could become simply a conversation with the breathing versus kind of gripping in the joints to get there. Yeah, I don't think we think of our hip joint as trying to get our leg farther down, but the arm is probably the shoulder joint quickly. And if your sand falls, you might go back to the sand across the hip. Okay, let's take a few quieting moments, exploring the movement of the extremities, subtle. And certainly where there's reaction in your back and your spine. This is ideally a really great position to help our backs heal. Side stretches. So notice if that's even a part of your awareness or hope. And even more relaxing of the neck. Maybe just letting it surrender the weight of the brain, the circulation in your body settling on the props. And if it becomes too much for you to have this shape with the hip or the arching patterns, you can always opt to have the right leg stacked on the left leg, so you're more of a fetal position. And that might be a little more comforting for the hip. You might have to reset your sand a little bit or not use it, but at least we're keeping that spine open. Okay, a few more moments. Now, in between the sides, we're going to go with a little seated pattern. Okay, so we are going to do a good healthy amount of upright stability, a little bit of strength today with some standing shapes, but in between on these two sides, instead of going with some of those, we're going to approach just simply moving the right arm towards the sand, taking the sand off, and then setting your focus so the right leg combs in towards the left. Feel if the ribs can rotate. They're not counter spinning, right? They're going down to the left. Hands to the blanket, maybe the floor. And then when you come up, you're going to sit on the bolster. I'll shift a little towards you. And so you'll take a left leg bending and right leg outing. And when that approaches for your left knee, it might be a ball under it. Like if it's buoyant at all, if it's not touching down, not likely is it going to with bolster underneath you. Some of us, the hip has this openness and it does drop down. So I'm kind of going back from the flexibility pressures and going with stability. So I'm going to keep something under my knee. It could be a block, it could be a ball. And then a sandbag on the top. So maintain and get a belt. That potential here of this lengthening approach. So I've got my belt. It seems to still be buckled up. So I'm going to keep that. It probably won't hurt my experience. But when I hold on to the belt, actually, I think it will. So I want you to have a little, enough length with your belt. So this should be long enough. I made the loop a little smaller. Or make a little loop around your foot. And then bring your belt behind you. So the back of the waist. And then hold on to the belt with the left hand. Now the hand could be really close. Doesn't have to be this far back. That's a lot more in the shoulder, in the clavicle, and you might feel this is just pulls. And then it kind of reaches in this cubicle here. So I like this pattern for the heat in the shoulder, but you might find just don't aggressively push back. Feel if you can get your hand close enough to your back. It'll be easier for you to see when I turn this way. Okay, so trying to figure it out here, just like all of us. All right, so when I have this, so my hand is closer towards my right hip, actually, that's what I meant. It's closer back behind. And if you want your arm to be reaching out and back and take the hand farther back, I warn you a little on that one, just having experienced the day after with that position in my shoulder. So we want to feel like the ribs can stretch back and there's rotation. Right? There's rotation in the shoulder. There's openness and this layer of connection in the upper ribs, right? These are ribs up here. Okay, so feel where you turn and then feel if your neck can find a little more relaxation, maybe not as much rotation. The eyes close. If you have a ball under the leg, it's nice that you can relate to relaxing on it. Right, they're pretty responsive versus the block, but the block can be good too. We'll take another breath here. No force on trying to twist further, just feel the rotation. Okay, and now come back forward and let's take that right leg in front and hold on to the belt with both hands, just like you did on your back with your leg up. Sort of, I mean, brain float had a little of this kind of pull, but it feels different when you're sitting than when you're on your back, a little different for your back muscles. Now they have to activate. The whole back successfully has to kind of tangle together with your ribs so they become like a whole shield of support for your back. So this is a good one for hip, sciatic, this is strengthening. And it might feel like you have to really be bold on simplifying. Just let the leg lift, don't go too high, don't drop it down too far because your hip flexor could get a little bit flabbergasted at your approach. Try to keep the legs straight so the back of the knee is open. Okay, and then coordinate the shoulders back. Okay, now as you bend through the right knee, okay, we're going to shift. So I want you to go belt free for a moment, cross the right foot in front of the left shin. Doesn't have to be that tight into the leg, but keep it crossing. Sand to the right thigh. Maybe you maintain that ball on the left leg, and then hands will come to the bolster or maybe forward. So if I have the forward idea, I would get my blocks together in front, well, kind of close, and they're at least across from each other, and I lean a little forward. So be a little careful on how far you reach with your ribs. And again, you could have your hands on the bolster and tilt. You can use the block so then you get a little bit more range out of your back, out of the hip. A few moments here. Let the spine strengthen right into the very center chamber, right? Behind the liver point. So you want to get a feeling of the knees motioning out. The adductors slightly stretching as well. Okay, and those of us that have hands forward versus hands on bolster, we're going to take a couple moments of cat-cow. So rounding the back and gently arching. So just this action of moving the spine and the ribs together, right? Strengthening that center line of energy up to the brain. So just movements, rounding. See if you can articulate the back. And it's pretty mild through the ribs. I find they're probably a little less movement than the back, the spine at least. Okay, now as you come back to your center line, walk the hands back to the legs. If they're on the bolster, bring them back up to the legs. And then take the left leg out Well, actually, it doesn't go out, out. It just lengthens from its bent position. And we'll keep the ball. If you're going to use it, you'll put it under the right leg. And then you'll take your belt. Sand stays on the right thigh. Reach it. I mean, my loop is still pretty big, but I'm short, so I don't need a tiny loop under my foot. But I want you to have enough of a belt from your left foot behind your left thigh. Then as I wrap it around to the back and I hold on this right arm, keep in mind your right shoulder is trying to turn in. So the work is on moving it, of course, back. Like open the chest, lift the heart. All things will be fine then. Okay. So if the arm moves back, I get to choose. Do I have my hand closer to my left hip? That could be really good for some of us in our back to really strengthen those muscles in the upper back, but it might be irritating for some. So hold on to the belt. What's holding the belt is your pec muscles right now. You're really working your chest. Your heart rate might shift a little bit. Things might feel a little bit more demanding. So hold on to that right leg with the left hand, the knee or just above or just below, and rotate thick back ribs, right? Going to the left and then rotating through the shoulders. Ah, I know you're muted, so you can emote if you like. Depends on your home environment. I tried to get a cat or two to join, but they just jumped right off of the blanket and left. Okay, won't have anything to do with class. Okay, so feel where there's directional pressure for some of us right in the head of the shoulder. Okay, now give a little bit of slack with that right arm pulling. So feel as you turn back center to the front with your navel towards front, and then get a hold of that belt with both hands. Pull. Now feel what muscles you have to kind of tighten up to get the leg across to the center. So you might need to redirect your circulation with your arms a little closer to your foot. You might bend your left knee and scoot your hands towards your foot then, and then kick out. Okay, but this time, maybe on the second side, we have the opportunity to notice, oh, okay, when I take the hip crossover, this I want to set up so I have some nice balance in my lower back into the pelvis, wrapping around the hip. So let this be really quite muscular. You're reaching with arms, with leg, with shoulders shrugging back. Just try it. They might go for it. They might not respond. Shoulders have a pretty short attention span. They want to go forward and round and comply with the eyes moving forward and down. Okay, now as you bend through the left knee, I think that's how you're going to have to get your foot down, is to do a little bit more of the bent approach. And then as I slip the belt off, the left foot crosses, the sand goes over to the left thigh, and I reach forward onto the blocks. So try to keep the information spiel through the legs to be simple. If you feel a medial, right, or a lateral pressure on that left knee, or the right knee for that matter, you might need to be a little closer to your center of gravity versus farther drawing down. So let's say it does feel a little bit of pressure, but you want that hip stretch. I would come back to the center, try to find that sitting bone perspective. And then if you tip a little forward with your ribs, then feel if you can get your blocks a little more narrow in front of you, not so spread out. And then feel if you can move from your upper body down. Who knows, it might be helpful. It might be better if you'd have your hands on your bolster, kind of reach them to the back and hug your palm onto the bolster and tip forward. Worst case scenario, the bolster might flip behind you. I could see that happening, but It'd be more entertaining than anything. Okay, so feel the tilt, feel how the bolster is helpful for our base approach. And now this left leg is kind of warmed up for our side sage. So we'll come back up and we'll take this left leg the other direction. So you'll move your ball. And then when you do take the side sage, let's see, we got our blankets pretty much ready. So we got a block overhead now. Not all of you use a block, so not everyone needs to. But when I come down with this left leg, that I think of these parts as being kind of precious. It's like, okay, I got the knee out. Now when I step the foot forward, I'm going to slide my hips down. And then as the left leg reaches back, I take the opposite direction with my hip joint. But for me, I feel more my knee joint, but for some of you, it might be up higher. And when you tilt down with your waist, kind of feel like you slouch into your bolster here a little bit. It's like you're kind of dropping even more after you get the sensation that your hip is down, your sand is close to being where you want it. Remember, the farther the sand goes down, the more it might pressurize your knee. Even though it feels far from your knee, you know, it's going to put a little bit of that setting. So if you have some knee pressure with that position, you might have a little more ease if your sand is up on your ribs. I mean, we rarely hear about the ribs feeling like the knee feels. Unusual is all. So as you reach your left arm, and there's just the right amount of reach. Not too little, not too much. Just a pinch of reach. And then feel that directional length in your mid-body. Feel the weight into your right hip. And relax the eyes. Be a little bit aware of if you turn too much with your ribs or your head, that it could affect the knee as well. So you want to find things that create some balance in your shoulder, in your hips, and then the knees. Give it a few moments. Maybe even enjoy that stimulation of the sand on the breathing muscles. Weight training. Some of us don't mind the sand on the side, but we do on the front. It can feel claustrophobic on the front for some, but the sides it's achievable. So if you might try to use that sand at your ribs, so it's a little weight training. There's plenty of study work on sand on ribs that's helpful, right, for the breathing muscles and the diaphragm. Primarily, you know, it feels like it's just the ribs in themselves. But you can do that on the side too. And this is side two. Okay. Now, we've used the props to kind of hold our shapes for the most part. We did some seated work. So now let's try to use our pose to kind of lean into the articulations, right? So it's different when you're not leaning into your bolster for the whole class. So take a little bit of time here to fine tune. And then once you're able to let your head roll to the right, if you've got a block overhead, it could probably just stay for now. But as you lower that left arm down to the sand and slide that off, then we'll start to make our way to the knees together. And we'll come up, and I want you to take your bolster so it goes off to the side, and you'll need your blocks. And we did a little child pose kind of sampling the other day. It sounded like that went okay for us with our knees. So I want us to kind of present a little of that. So we have some continuation of knee care, continuation of care. So let's take a couple blocks to the kind of front sides of our mat. You don't have to be at the wall quite yet. We're almost doing wall, but not quite. So when you kneel onto the blanket that's in a quarter fold, my blanket's, it's pretty flat, but you could have yours even lower if you want. You can have it, you know, completely flattened out. We are gonna do a little standing work, so I don't want your blanket to be so far out you're gonna trip over it. And then you'll have a blanket on top of your calves. It kind of scoots in, so I have my blanket close to the back of my knees. It's kind of tucked in there. Hands under shoulders. Yeah, don't be too close to the wall so you don't knock your brain into it. Okay, feet are apart. And as the hands are open, the feet and the hands, right, have kind of a similar hope right now to hold you up, but they could be the more opposite, right? You're on top of the feet, the skin of the palm is down. So as you round your back into a flexion, cat pose. And then of course, these motions, alternating, flexing and arching, become quite mobile when you're pushing into your hands and rounding the back. Okay, so take a few of these and feel how the shoulders can react. Like you can play with it even to the point you know that's not the right shoulder movement. Just kind of squirm around with it, even if you wag your tail or get a little squiggly with your spine. Feel the motions of the ribs and the hips. Okay, now bring the hands out wide and farther forward, and then come down towards the upward dog. And as your spine lengthens in the front, right, the discs get a little bit more hydration now. This is clearly the best for our backs, even though I have to admit, I don't always calculate this as feeling the best for osteo conditions, but it is the best direction, right, for that strength. It feels compactive, but it is actually hydrating. So work on lifting up through the front of the spine, like you're feeling length in the belly. And then as you come back, you're gonna kind of snuggle yourself towards a child's pose. So that means the knees broaden out a little. And you reach back. Now some of us, our hips are gonna stay really high. We're not gonna sink down to our feet. Some are gonna lower down and then place the hands to make a little bit of a hand stack under your forehead. Another option would be to have your head on a block or on your bolster. But if you find just you in the blankets is good. Yeah, if it doesn't feel like it's scratching any sensation or dull pressure on the knees, it's okay. But you have just a few moments. I want us to find this position because of the openness of the back, of the rib cage and the pelvis. That's all. Not for a feat of flexibility, how far you can sink into your feet. And now once we've scratched that, we're going to come up and scratch the, well, don't scratch the blanket, but move it away. Maybe you like to scratch your blanket, I don't know. And then as your hands open, make sure your blocks are going to be now on the left side of your mat. This is a technical day. And lift up the knees and stretch back so you're firming up the arms, the core, and the legs. Now you have the palm of the hand, of course that never changed, but the soles of the feet now. So you have kind of those vulnerable spots of your extremities, palms and feet, right? They're the sides that you want to have contact with the earth with those places. Now, when you lengthen through your back, it's challenging likely for us on either side, either the legs or the arms. One or the other is going to be some kind of effort for you. So pedal it out, whether you need to come back down to your hands and knees for a few moments. Work with even looking at your foot range, right? The range of the skin and how it could be different from one foot to the other to stretch down through the skin of the bottom of the foot, strike down towards the heel, okay? And then feel how your feet are when they're this distance. Just kind of notice that. I want you to kind of stand in that connection, especially since your arms are so active. Okay. Now walk your hands back. We're going to take a stance that's very wide. So I want you to bend your knees. This is taking a slow shift because of the blood pressure change. I don't want you to whip the brain all the way up. But let the arms dangle and then slowly push into your feet to come up. And then turn to your left. So you're going to take a stance that's wider. Okay. I know we're kind of going all around the place today, huh? With our practice. But take a wide stance. You could turn any direction, I suppose, but keep an accountability of what legs, goes with the lunges. So now the footing practice feels like you're mostly leg focused, okay, versus the arms using their connection to help you stay stretched back. But now when you go forward, this is when you need some blocks. You're going to take a hold of your, yes, that means my belt there, but your blocks. Take your blocks and have them enough in front of you that now you can relate to your arms again, okay? So this means I want them they're not pushed out as far as possible, but they're under your shoulders so that you feel something that's similar to the connection of downward dog, the last pose we did, with the soles, right? The palms and the soles of the feet. Now, when you feel your hips back, now work on moving the hips back so you have some connection of the hips reaching behind you. Okay, the legs are pretty toned, right? There's not much more than you can get, but you can tell how this one could be a little more challenging on hip and knees than downward dog. Very rarely you hear downward dog and knee issue, right? Okay, pretty rare. But as this one takes a little more challenge, so I want you to keep the top of the thighs active like you're pulling the skin up, the top of the thigh. So you're activating the top leg into the hip. And then I want you to bring if you've got a blanket in the middle, just kind of tuck it into the center so it's not going to be under your hands. And then you can either take your blocks under your hands in with you inside of that foot line, the big toe area, that line, or your hands back between the leg. You're going to lower down your head, maybe to your blanket. So you're very inverted now, right? You're as inverted as you're going to get today, likely. So you can always take your blanket up a little higher if the head doesn't touch down. But your goal is not to get your blanket under your head and move your head up, right? You want to do your maximum range. So don't add a blanket if you can already get your head low. And the hands are going to be in line. Now, if I use my blocks, it gives a different stretch to me a little bit. I don't mind it at all. I kind of find that interesting. It's just that now my arms are pushing into my legs. Okay, a little much. So get a feel for your connection or challenge. Could be a big challenge to be here. And then how do the legs react? Can they pull up again? Okay. Good. Sense the spacing of the feet. Try to keep the simplicity in feet down, hips back and up. Breathing. The ribs love this direction. It's quite challenging for the breathing muscles to be upside down now, even more so than when your legs are up. Okay, now see if you can reach the legs with the hands. So you're just going to hold on to the legs, lower bones. Elbows open a little bit. Good. And feel where there's connection here with the circulation kind of suctioned up into the hip. Modify anything you need. If something's too much, come out. Hands down, and then as you gently lift up your head and you reach to your blocks, both of them, you're going to turn to the right foot and take a low lunge. So the blanket may have to be pushed back underneath your left knee. Bring the left heel up, lower the left knee down to the blanket. Be as cautious as you can with digging into the blanket with your knee. I would recommend to really stream it back so you're getting as much length, like you were, the back leg was going into kind of like the splits kind of interaction. So it is reaching back through that left hip point, down through the knee. If it hurts your knee to be down, then you don't push it down. You can hook your toes under and lift up the knee. It's a little more workout for certain. Just be clear your right knee is not over your toes, the right toes. Okay. So balancing the front of the hip. Good, we're timed good on this set here. So the hands could be back underneath, so they're not too far drawing down. You're not rounding your shoulders to be here. You have to kind of work to get up. A little bit more quad stretch. Okay, now if my toes are under on my left foot, that can be a little aggravating to the knee. So anything less would be best. And now can you feel that right heel kind of pull, like you're trying to pull yourself forward? It's so much work right through the kind of the hip chamber to get that motion, that strength. Of course, if it feels too much strain, back off. And then as we come up, we're going to hook the toes under left foot. You're going to lift up the back knee and then maintain a very steady lunge, just pure lunge, right knee above the ankle, nothing more to do, nothing more to lift and kind of push. I want you to feel the ball of the back foot stretch into that back foot, not to the not heel to the floor, just stretch back through the heel above the ground. And then as the ball of the back foot is ready to go, you're going to kind of push off it left foot to right. That could be a little bit of a quarrel with the hip to now have such differences in what you've planted into the hip line. So as you send the right leg back, let's start with it up a little bit. It doesn't have to be up for long, but steady that left knee just above the ankle. Okay. You might like to start with a lunge up, give it the energy here before you dive the knee down. Stabilize. If you're enjoying this strength balance moment, you could take the blocks a little higher, change the feeling in the ribs. It's kind of subtle, but it's nice to feel these ways of moving on our bones, our extremities, to support our organs, our midlines, and then lower that back knee. Okay, if you're not going to lower it all the way, that's fine. Maybe it works for you to have it up. Maybe it works for you to have it grounded. Just be cautious on how much it pushes on a kneecap, right? No one needs to get their patella ground in. So you might let the toes swipe back. And this is going to be our lead into our wall work today. So bridge pose at the wall, which is a really good quad, hip flexor lengthener. So let this be a little bit of an entry into that connection in the front of the hip. But you know, in this pattern, we can't do both of these at the same time, but in bridge we can. Up dog would be doing them both at the same, but you don't get quite the amount of intensity, right? So steady that perspective of how you move this knee joint back. So you're gonna slide the left knee back, or you have to step back into it really. And then when you come around into this next shape, I want you to actually use your bolster under the front of the hip. So you're gonna turn it across like so, horizontal. And then hands reaching, palms pressing, just the right amount so the hips are releasing down. Now, if this is just a lot for you right now to have your back arched this long, well, then you come down in your elbows and you continue that process in the hips. You might feel better on your hands than your elbows, though. So we'll just find this is more arched than we want than this. So it's just different part of the spine pressing. Take just a couple more moments here with the up dog. Okay, kind of do a little bit of a scan. where you feel the stretch in the front. Maybe it's even up into the ribs kind of spoking around. Okay, and that very core line, trying to get that to lift up and not using your head to push it up, right? Porpoise push. Okay, now coming back to table. Now we're going to crawl to a wall. So I want you to have a bolster when you go to a wall space, and you need your blanket one, and you're going to take a moment to get there. So for all of us, let's find our way to a wall. We give plenty of time. And the blanket is likely going to be important just for a little small bit of it under your head. So see if you can have your blanket flattened out so it's low. You probably don't want to have too many crinkles in your blanket. Flat, with something stuck in there. Maybe there's some almonds in this blanket. I don't know what's in there. Okay, so, all right, you should be mixing that with your yoga practice. All right, so we have our feet at the wall, and I mentioned you have a bolster, and that's going to be for your hip crossovers. But in the meantime, we've got a wall, and we've got likely a block nearby. So bring your feet up at that wall space and have a level of connection with the separation, and put a block between. If you happen to have your ball, that might be nice between the knees even more. But if you don't, most of us might not have. Well, actually, this group I think is pretty mixed with having either. So if you have a ball, use that. If you don't, use a block between the knees. The block, let's see, the width. Ball's a little wider, isn't it? But once you lift up, it's going to probably be the same width with your legs squeezing. So with the ribs and their natural arch, this is important. You just let the natural arch happen so a tiny creature could crawl through underneath you. That's a good arch. Tiny creature, but then let that spine press into the creature. Okay, and you're going to push down through the spine so the spine drives the length, and then just push into the wall with your feet, of course. That's the difference right now, is that we're using the wall to massage through the spine. Now your arms could go back overhead, but with sometimes an achy body, right, when you move through the poses, even though they feel good, there's achiness sometimes. So you might scoot the feet a little higher up on the wall and lift up the hips. Now go at your own merry pace. You're going to lift and lower. Arms go lower down besides the hips when you lower your spine and your hips. And there might be a little bit of a bumpy road to get all the way down to the hip placement. A little bit of rubble. And then if you feel like tired, you don't want to go up and down fast, you might go really slow. Sometimes going really slow could be more tiring. Takes a little more strength and control. So take a few more times lifting and lowering. At the most, a few more, maybe two more. And then once the spine has balanced on both sides, I want you to lower down. But this time when you lower down, you're going to remove the ball and you're going to add a block now under the pelvis. So what we'll need to do is kind of decide on this measurement for each of us. So the nice thing about the feet this high is you can usually get on the block where it's the highest it is. Usually in the middle of the room, that's very challenging for us. But when we get the lift, you can have the block at the mid-height, this is fine, and lower the spine down, or the sacrum and the tailbone area down, move the blanket so it's just a little bit under your head, not under your shoulders at all. It'll make a great difference in your back muscles. You can tell it changes the lung pressure. I can tell it when I talk through it. And now my feet are separating a little bit. They're parallel toes up the wall, not turning out at all. And then if I decide to go a little higher, I can turn my block, but noticing this is going to challenge your thyroid. I mean, the throat gets a little bit of pressure. So let's say you can get the just at that tailbone, you can feel that hook at the base of the spine on that block, and it's stable, it's not shifting, then you're good to go. And the reason I offer this one today is so those of you that want to lower your feet down to the floor and get a really nice high bridge pose and a stretch for the hip flexors. And the shoulders are squeezing in towards the spine and the hands lower straight down. This might take you a little bit of fussing around to see if it works for you at all. What if you want to get your feet down and get that full bridge, but you want it lower? You can take the block a little lower. It's different. It's nice when you can try for that height, because that's probably the rarest time you can do it is with the wall. I can't do it with simplicity and no discomfort without the wall. But the toes are kind of stretched up on the wall. If the feet are down, you want to stretch out the ball of the foot, toes stretch up. If you don't like your feet on the ground, you need them up at the wall, and keep them up. Give about a minute here, about 12 to 15 breaths. You're choosing your height. Remember, if that lift of the block is too much, you stay at the mid height and you are on your merry way to the merry bridge. Okay. And the shoulders are centered back. The chest is hoping to open. Now in the final spinal, belly moves with the breath. Good. Yeah, if you're lifted a little bit with your toes at the wall, also relax the rest of the foot. And those of you that tried to get your block higher and it just didn't feel right today, I would recommend, let this one be a little bit of a homework piece. You could try this other times. It's a nice one to develop an awareness of the hip flexors opening. So I would practice it a little bit. Let it be something you might add in just once or twice in the next week and just sample and see if the hips get a little more mobile, the spine gets more open, the hip flexors. Okay, now as we lower down, after your feet are down the floor, the best way to get out of it would be to bring them back up to the wall. Even if it seems so easy, it's okay to let the props help you out. And then I have to be a little careful, like even if my block is any height, I want to make sure my shoulders are still back and my shoulders aren't pinned under as much. I let them kind of glide open. And then I push real firm, use the back of the legs pushing versus pushing into the knees, and then slide the block out. And then really milk that spine massage down. Make a nice imprint with your spine into your mat, so it surprises you later. Take a hip crossover. So as the spine meets the mat, you're going to scoot you can make your blanket a little higher actually on this one. Scoot it back, and then as we are a little distant from the wall, we'll take you might have to go farther away than you think. Take the right leg so it's straight. That's key. Okay. Left leg crosses over. If the bolster needs a little more height, you could add a block on top of the bolster. This actually feels nice today for my hip. You can add a blanket. It's a little more padded. You can add your sand to the outer left leg, or you can just keep it clear. You can decide. And maybe less is more on this one. Just get a feeling of that crossing over. Not going to be a long hold. So the key would be arms are open, shoulders are back. If you can find shoulders back, and I know some of you might not. It might be a little grippy in your opposite shoulder. Left shoulder might be kind of pulling up. So your work is to do these basic elementary shapes to keep the ribs open, the circulation to the heart and the lungs. I think these are important, right? These are basic. basic science postures, right? For heart, lungs, basics. But you want to know that, okay, I can do those fundamentals. It's my baseline pose. Yeah, I kind of miss the sand, but I know this is still giving me some good direction in my hip joint. Now feel when you shift your left leg back to center and you change over with the bolster. If you're not using the bolster for your crossover, that's fine. You could let your left leg be straight and you could swing it over. That could work out. I could see a world in that just being fine. So you decide. It's basically using the props to help you out. That's all it's about. So when I cross over, we're not making as big of a deal about all the props on this one. I did leave out the ball. I missed it too. That would have been helpful, is to have that ball at the sacrum. Now, every time you do this, you realize you missed something you could have done, but shoulda, woulda, coulda. So the arms are open. Even if the arm doesn't look like the hand is out, there's still a sense of the arm body open for the chest. Just using the floor as a prop to open up. If you're missing anything on your pose, take a moment to fill the gaps. Stand on the side of the leg or block under. If it feels too easy, that's okay. Head rolls to the right. Now let's simplify our direction. So we're going to bring the head center, and then I want you to find a way as you take out this shape and get your body to a full inversion, a final pose. And we'll make it, we'll do a nice amount of time, but then a very, very brief ending. So I want you to get this one as your focus. So when you come up, have the bolster. If you're going to do chair shoulder stand, it'll be different. Now, some of you might opt for that. But when you place the bolster right to the wall space, or you use your chair for chair shoulder stand, have a support of a sandbag for this one for certain. And you can have your blanket in, and you can get yourself so that you lift up your legs. Okay, so you're going to sit your rear, and you do want to try to get your sitting bones, and maybe you have a couch you're putting your legs on, or a bed. Some of us might have other things that we're lifting higher, but you want to get your rear really close to where your legs are going to be at their base. So when I lift up, I'm not necessarily all the way to the wall every time. I try to get more of this rotation out of my hips, so I almost fall to the other side. And then distance from the wall is fine. Connection to the wall is nice, but I think it's overrated. Even though it seems to be the gold standard just to get your whole body pasted up to that wall. So find what your layer of ease is with your pelvis. And then add your sand to your feet. Or maybe add your sand to your ribs. But the connection is to, it's different than in the middle of the room. It's got a nice clarity to it. Right? You don't have to be energizing so many parts. And you feel like it is a little more upside downness when your feet are at the wall space. It's a different journey for the brain. If there's not anything it has to attend to doing at all, you're not registering the muscle action as often. So feel where your breath is in your hands. And perhaps you might put your arms out to full width. They might be stretching a little back. They might be in more of a cactus shape. But perhaps when you find that decision with your arms, you can connect back into your center of gravity, which is lower than the hands, right? It's the pelvis, that's the the agreement on our center of gravity. So that's just simply structural, skeletal. You might feel like your center is at your heart, or many people would point to that probably. So feeling where the abdomen maybe pushes the hands, if you're using that perspective. Make sure that the arms are cozy and the eyes are relaxed back. Let's come here for a few moments of resetting the heart, the blood pressure, the internal balance. Now resting the organs from gravity's downward pull. So feeling maybe the swelling of the abdominal diaphragmatic motion, but it goes against gravity in this moment. Okay, so let that be a cumulative effect from the class now and into probably the next hour or so. We're not staying in this pose for an hour, but your perspective could be cumulative in your organs. Just kind of notice what the awareness there is, if any, comes on. Okay, and then as the legs have their assignment of being against a wall, you're going to bend through the knees, and likely you'll set the sand either overhead or down to your side, and then feel the feet to the wall, feel the back arch, and you'll feel almost that gravitational kind of directional assignment does affect kind of the brain. So you'll feel that when you come up, sometimes the consciousness has been a little bit gypsied around and a little bit full in the head because of the blood flow. So when you take your knees in and you spend a moment rocking side to side, and then eventually coming around to sitting bones. Or is it sitting bones, or is it two? And feel where the spine lines. And let's take a moment really with this kind of recognition of each other in practice, not vocalized, but just centering our mind on the connectivity of the group. And let the hands rise into the space in front of the heart. So there's palms touching, there's thumbs motioning to the heart, or maybe slightly below. Let your eyes relax and the face soften. And as you bow towards the heart center, sending wellness out to each of us in the class,